There's one thing quietly capping your income, your relationships, and your results. And it's not the market, it's not your boss, it's not bad luck. It's a sentence that you keep repeating to yourself when no one's listening. It's how you speak about yourself. It's the thoughts in your head that you don't even consciously think, or maybe consciously think. And if you don't catch it, you'll keep rebuilding the same ceiling for yourself year after year until you understand how it actually works. Now, this isn't some woo-woo nonsense. This is really backed by science. And in the next few minutes, I'm gonna show you real published research, not motivational fluff, on how the words you use about yourself quietly take over your decisions. And I'll hand you a simple framework to find the exact belief running your self-sabotage, and I'll show you how to replace it. So what made me start thinking about this topic is because just the other day, I was talking with someone I'm very close to and I know very well, and over the last year, she has made over $100,000 in a single month trading. The month before that, it was like 80,000, 40,000 consistently. She was making great numbers in the trading market for months. Now, somewhere in the middle of that success, she started saying things like, I'm not disciplined. I've been a failure my whole life. I don't know if I even have a skill set. So she kept telling me, I need to find out if I have a skill set. I need to know if I have a skill set. I don't have a skill set. And not long after that, the wheels came off. She started losing $10,000, $20,000 in a single session. And this just kept going for months and months. She just kept losing thousands upon tens of thousands of dollars. And when I brought up to her old numbers just the other day, and she was telling me that she didn't have a skill set and that she's a failure, I brought up to her old numbers. And she had half forgotten about them. She told me that the most she had ever made was $40,000 in a month. So I had to literally pull up our messages and show her that she had made $100,000 a month and she had sent it to me. That she had made $80,000 a month and she had sent me screenshots. And her response to me was, oh, well, it's because it was a bull market. Everybody was making money. It's a bull market. Not true. And here's what's really interesting is that none of that explanation matches what actually happened. What changed wasn't just the market. What changed mostly was the sentences she started repeating to herself, the way she started speaking to herself. Now, many of you may have heard, or maybe you haven't heard, of Brian Tracy. He's a very successful speaker, and he also wrote a best-selling book called The Psychology of Selling. And you may have heard him even talk about this issue of the self-concept. Now, in his book, Brian Tracy says that a person can't make more or less than 10% of their self-concept level of income. Basically, if they see themselves as a $50,000 person, they can't make $60,000. I mean, they can only make up to $60,000 before they start to self-sabotage. Or they can't make below $40,000 before they start hustling and trying to figure out how to start making money. Basically, if you take somebody who's always been a millionaire and then you make him broke, he's gonna do everything to figure out how to become a millionaire again. But if you take somebody who views himself as a broke person, as a poor person, and has always viewed themselves as a poor person, and then they suddenly start making money, they have a propensity to self-sabotage. Now, I'll be honest, I tried to find the study that talked about this 10% level of income thing, and I couldn't find any verifiable sources that confirmed this exact concept of 10%. But the idea of, but what I did find was something very close to it. And it's backed by real peer-reviewed research. So the real science is a term called cognitive dissonance. And in cognitive dissonance, it basically means that a person will experience extreme levels of discomfort if they're holding two things in their mind at the same time that both cannot be true. For example, if you view yourself as only being a poor person who's only ever made, minimum wage, and then suddenly you start making $50,000 a month, $80,000 a month, $100,000 a month, you can't simultaneously make this extremely high amount of money while also being poor. And that creates cognitive dissonance. Now, this concept of cognitive dissonance, it comes from the psychologist Leon Festinger, called cognitive dissonance. And a lot of people don't realize that this belief system is the very thing that's under their self-sabotage. It's the reason why they begin to self-sabotage. So if someone their whole life has viewed themselves as a poor person and they suddenly start making a lot of money, that's a contradiction in the brain. And the brain must resolve the contradiction. And it can only do it in one of two ways. It can either update their programming to view themselves as a successful person. It updates their identity, or it will cause them to self-sabotage and go back to the original state so that that can then be true. In other words, I view myself as a poor person, that's my identity. I make a ton of money. I will waste all that money until I come back into alignment with my identity of being poor. That's why, one of the reasons why people can win the lottery and just a couple years later, they're just as broke. So the other thing that I want to point out, the second very important thing is the difference between identity language and like process language, basically. So here's where it gets specific. Researchers studying how language shapes behavior, they ran a real world experiment around a presidential election. And half of the voters got a survey asking how important it was to them to be a voter. The other half got asked about the importance of voting. You see, it's a difference. Same idea, but totally different grammar. The people who were asked about being a voter turned out to vote at a rate at almost 14% more, 14% higher. And the reason why is because they had an identity attached to being a voter. Whereas when a verb was used, how important is it to vote? How important is voting? Those people didn't have the identity of being a voter. So now apply that same thing to trading. When this lady started saying, I have no discipline, I'm not a disciplined person, I've always been a failure, that's an identity statement. Those are identity claims. And a person is much more inclined to fall into alignment with their identity than they are just an action. That's why that's why it's very important to mind the words that you say. It's very important to choose the language that you use very powerfully and very consciously, because identity language has the ability to shut doors and to open doors. Process language has the ability to allow you to identify an issue in your life, but then go back and change that issue. Why? Because it's not your identity. So the next concept is self-efficacy. This concept comes down to something, it connects to something that psychologist Albert Bandura called self-efficacy. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right, but Albert Bandura. And this has to do with your belief in your own ability to perform a specific task. And this isn't some like fringe theory. There was a meta-analysis covering over 100 studies, and more than 21,000 people found a real meaningful link between a person's self-efficacy, their ability, their belief in their ability to do something, and their actual performance. Now, when that belief drops, when that self-efficacy drops, performance tends to drop right along with it. And not because the market shifted, not because the market shifts or the environment shifts, but because the lens through which you're making decisions, the lens through which you're seeing the world, the lens through which you're seeing the opportunity shifts. Now, this same thing is true for that lady who was exceptionally good as a trader, but her self-efficacy dropped. The next thing I want to talk about is third-person self-talk. Now, here's the part that really surprises me. A lot of people don't realize the power of switching from the first person to the third person. Now, researchers at Michigan State and the University of Michigan put people in brain scanners and had them start talking to themselves, either using I statements or by using their own name. In other words, I feel this way versus Justin feels this way. And what they found is that when using their own name, instead of I, speaking in the third person, Justin felt da-da-da, speaking in the third person lowered activity in the part of the brain that was tied to self-referential emotional processing. And it measurably reduced how intensely people reacted to upsetting images. What am I saying? I'm saying that by speaking in the third person, they were able to emotionally detach from a situation without the brain working any harder to do it. And these small shifts in how you talk to yourself, it changes how you functionally fused who you are with what's happening. In other words, by taking myself out of the situation, or by taking yourself out of the situation and speaking in the third person, you're able to view an emotionally troubling situation or whatever with more objectivity, with less emotion. And you're able to think more reasonably. Look at how LeBron James talks about himself. LeBron James often speaks about himself in the third person. A lot of very successful people actually do this. Now, had this lady started speaking to herself in the third person as opposed to identifying as a failure, it's possible that her emotional attachment to certain failed actions, verbs, not her identity, may have been less emotionally strenuous. In other words, it would have not impacted her so negatively. Same way you can speak in the third person when you're dealing with a highly intense emotional situation. That way you can think more objectively and reduce your emotional attachment to the issue. Now, the last thing that I really think I want to cover here is that you have stress on top of it all. So if you add one more layer, identity level self-doubt, it triggers a real stress response. So remember, we have identity, and then if we add stress on top of this identity right here, it just compounds the issue. And it triggers a real stress response, which with the increase of cortisol, it's been proven to impair the function of the prefrontal cortex. Now, why is that important? The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's really responsible for discipline, patience, and risk control. So the defeated self-talk isn't just sounding bad, it may actively interfere with the very skills that you need in order to make sound decisions, to be patient, to be making the best logical decisions. And this same thing applies to that trader who suddenly started failing, right? Because increased stress response decreased the effectiveness of her prefrontal cortex. Her judgment is being impaired, literally. So here's how you actually use this in real life. Run this on whatever goal of yours that you feel stuck on right now. So let's say you have a goal, you feel stuck, do this. First, ask yourself, what's the one action that I keep taking or that Justin keeps taking, speaking the third person if it helps you, that works against your goals? Second, ask what belief about yourself sits underneath that action. Because before your actions will change, you have to change your belief systems around those actions. Third, what does that action actually give you? What's the benefit? What's the payoff? Even if it's a strange one, like avoiding the pressure of staying successful. A lot of people talk about the fear of failure, but a lot of people miss the fear of success. Maybe you're successful and you self-sabotage so you don't have to maintain the stress of remaining successful, the pressure. Celebrities face this a lot. Fourth, and this is the only question that really matters, does the payoff that you receive actually outweigh what you would otherwise gain by hitting your goal? Because if you're honest about that, and if the answer is yes, you prefer the payoff of feeling comfortable, then you'll never do the actions required to achieve your goal. You'll keep subconsciously choosing the old pattern until the belief changes, until the payoff is no longer worth it. But if the answer is no, and you believe that the payoff is not worth more than your real objective, than your real goal, if you don't believe that this current payoff is worth sacrificing your real goal, then you will begin to change. You must first change your belief, the belief system that undergirds your current action. Now, once you change that belief, you can then start to take new action. And here's the thing, at first it will feel unnatural for a while. And a lot of people don't realize why, but it's because your brain, it's an automatic processor. You have this programming in your brain that causes you to take actions consciously or unconsciously. Now, you will experience discomfort while you're reprogramming your brain. And that's discomfort. It's not proof that you're doing something wrong. It's the friction required to replace the old automatic patterns before the new ones become automatic too. Now, the reason why that is because if you think about it, anytime that you want to progress in anything, let's say that you're lifting weights, you have to first create tension. You have to break and tear down the muscles so that it can then heal and rebuild. Right now, you have to break certain belief patterns. You have to tear down these strongholds in your mind that are keeping you stuck. And then you have to rebuild new belief patterns and rebuild new automatic behaviors and actions that will take you closer to your objective. Now, that lady, she completely tanked her income because of the words that she said about herself, because of the beliefs that she had said about herself. And it was simply because of the sentences that she chose to speak. So before you blame your conditions, before you blame timing or bad luck, make sure to check your words. Check the things that you've said about yourself, that you're repeating about yourself. Now, I don't know what it is that your objective is in life, but know that it first starts with your belief, and your belief shapes your actions, and your actions shape the results that you get in life.